High balconies, open windows, and a growing number of dead women.
I'll show you where my sister landed. That's the third floor balcony up there, and this is where she fell to the ground.
In Turkey, many of these deaths are officially recorded as suicide.
Why didn't he try and stop her?
In 2025 alone, almost 600 women died in domestic incidents, with many cases unexplained. A lawyer warns the system favours those who kill by pushing victims to their deaths.
Anyone still killing his wife with a gun or a knife these days is usually among the less educated and poorer members of society.
After all, where there's no evidence, the perpetrator almost always goes unpunished. The city of Gaziantep in eastern Turkey, with a population of over 2 million. Sezay Kocak is visiting her older sister's grave. Although it's been almost 6 years since Sezay Kocak's death, the family cannot find peace. The mother of two is said to have thrown herself from the balcony of her flat in the presence of her husband and brother-in-law. She had been seeking a divorce.
A person who wants to take their life leaves something behind. My sister was in good spirits when she left our parents' apartment an hour earlier. She had summer vacation plans and had packed a bag to travel with her son to Ankara for a medical examination.
The alleged accident happened here, the block where Sezay Kocak lived with her husband and children, on the 3rd floor.
I'll show you where my sister landed. The 3rd floor balcony is up there, and this is where she fell to the ground. Her brother-in-law claimed she'd climbed over the railing and was holding on, and that she was hanging by one arm and eventually fell. But before that, the police had received an emergency call from neighbors saying a woman was being murdered, but the police arrived too late. She was still alive at first, but the paramedics couldn't save her.
State prosecutors ruled Sezay Koçak's death a suicide and closed the case. Her ex-husband didn't respond to our inquiries. Turkish women's rights groups say almost 600 women were killed in 2025 alone. In just under half of these cases, the women died in suspicious circumstances where the involvement of external factors can't be proven. All the investigations have been closed. Officially, 52 women took their own lives by jumping to their deaths, a figure that's been increasing for years. Women's rights activist Tuba Ashik is homing in on these alleged suicides. She's not buying the official line. At demonstrations, she calls them femicides.
Women in Turkey are now speaking out and saying, if they claim I committed suicide, don't believe it. I will never do such a thing. Of course, in some of these cases, it can't be ruled out that women may have taken their own lives. But we're calling on the judiciary to ensure that these cases are thoroughly investigated and that evidence is not destroyed.
This allegedly happened in a case in the capital, Ankara. On the evening of the 7th of November 2023, it's claimed Duygu Soytepe jumped from the 37th floor of a high-rise building. A man with whom the 24-year-old was having a relationship was present in the apartment. Her mother, Filiz Alkan, has still not come to terms with her daughter's death. It has affected her own health. She does not accept that it was suicide.
It just doesn't fit with the image I have of my daughter. And even if my daughter had intended to take her own life, why didn't he try and stop her? Why didn't he call me?
Duygu's death was recorded as suicide even before the autopsy results were released, says Filiz Alkan. For the prosecutor's office, the fact that Duygu had worked in a nightclub was enough.
The prosecutor claimed my daughter had taken drugs and alcohol and then thrown herself off the balcony. What was I supposed to say? I was at the end of my tether in any case. The prosecution was very quick to pass judgment, and I don't have the funds for a long legal battle. I've tried everything.
Çok yerlere girdim, çıktım ama hiçbir şey yapamadım çünkü param yoktu.
We want to know why the prosecutor was so convinced that this was a case of suicide. So we pay her a visit in the capital's Palace of Justice. Because filming is prohibited, we don't get past the foyer. Her assistant tells us that the case was closed in 2024. The prosecutor herself declined to be interviewed. Our request to inspect the investigation files went unanswered. Another case. A skyscraper in the Istanbul suburb of Kartal. It's alleged that a nurse fell to her death from the 27th floor in March this year. The young mother had been visiting a male friend that evening. As the investigation is still ongoing, the man concerned won't comment. Security staff at the residential complex are also saying nothing.
We don't want to say anything wrong. Everyone has their own private life here. We don't know anything about that. After all, I don't know what you're thinking or doing either.
Outside, we run into a neighbour. She remembers seeing the police, an ambulance and a body covered with a sheet.
I saw everything as I was coming home. I didn't know the woman, but it shocked me. I didn't sleep well that night and I was quite scared.
We go to the young woman's place of work, a nearby hospital, to make further inquiries. Then there's a surprising development. 4 weeks after the fatal fall, reports of a final text message suddenly emerge, allegedly sent by the victim to her mother. In the message, she states that she is at her wit's end and asks her parents to take good care of her son. Speaking to us anonymously, a former colleague and friend of the deceased doubts the authenticity of the text message. Turkish women's rights activists now also count the Istanbul case among other suspicious deaths and cast doubt on the suicide theory. But what do men in Turkey make of these mysterious falls? Do they also believe that so many of them are suicides?
Stress can lead to suicides like this. I imagine there could be problems with the children, within the family, or with the husband. People are taking more drugs. They experience hallucinations and then take their own lives, or the husband pushes the wife over the edge.
That would be manslaughter or even murder. So, are Turkish women's organizations right to cast doubt on the suicide theories? Mehmet Eskin, a social scientist from Istanbul, has been studying suicide as a social problem for many years, including in Turkey. He won't comment on individual cases, but says it's relatively rare for women to take their lives in this way.
Women usually take pills to commit suicide. If you see the Turkish statistics, it's almost 20 or 17% of the total suicides are done by women. So usually, suicidal thoughts and suicidal attempts, we observe them most in women. But suicidal mortality is mostly men do it.
Sezay Kocak remains convinced that her sister did not take her own life. This, even though in court, the ex-husband's family said she had been mentally unstable.
They claimed she was depressed and that she'd been receiving treatment, supposedly the reason for her alleged suicide. But my sister never took a single antidepressant in her life.
Benim ablamın kullandığı bir tane antidepresan yok.
At the home of Sezay Kocak's mother. For almost 6 years, the family has been fighting against such allegations. Allegations that only serve to deepen the pain of losing a daughter and a sister. With the support of a lawyer, Sezay Kocak is campaigning for the investigation into her sister's death to be reopened. The prosecution has reportedly ignored much of the circumstantial evidence pointing to foul play, for example, a neighbor's statement.
He said that first. He heard a lot of noise coming from the family's apartment. He opened his front door and saw the deceased's husband running down the stairs in a rage, shouting, "She got what she deserved, and that disgraceful woman." Imagine your wife, the mother of your children, falls from the balcony. Even if you'd had an argument beforehand, if you'd had nothing to do with it, would you react like that? It defies all reason.
But the courts have refused to reopen the case, and with every refusal, the mother's despair grows. How to prove that your daughter didn't commit suicide? Filiz Alkan has also lost faith in the Turkish legal system. Meanwhile, activists suspect the perpetrators are intentionally staging murders as suicides to exploit legal loopholes and secure impunity.
Anyone still killing his wife with a gun or a knife these days tends to be among the less educated and poorer members of society. But the suspects in unexplained deaths involving women are predominantly wealthy and educated.
Sezay Kocak intends to take the case all the way to the European Court of Human Rights. She says she owes it to her sister, who never wanted to die.